What if I told you, seen giant footprints in the snow, but no one standing there? Or woken up in the middle of a storm to find a pot of boiling water on your doorstep, miles away from the nearest soul? The truth is, something, not man, not beast, saved 3 people in the Montana wilderness. No camera captured it, but every detail matches the testimony of someone who vanished years ago. I was the last man pulled out of the '83 fire. I shot at it, but it saved me. In the next 60 seconds, you'll uncover why a horse thought to be dead came back to save lives, who betrayed the rangers to a drug cartel, and whether that towering figure in the woods truly exists. An old photograph, burned at the edges, shows me, and just behind, a silhouette nearly 9 feet tall. I lived because of it. And today, I'm telling this story because not everyone gets a second chance. If you've ever thought the forest was just trees and wind, stay with me. This might make you think twice before walking alone in the woods again. Oh, and before we dive in, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country below. I'd love to say hello, personally. The wind howled through the skeletal pines like a scream trapped under the weight of snow. In the Absaroka Range, winter didn't ask permission. It came in sideways, all teeth and silence, and the cold was old enough to remember the names of those who once tried to conquer it. That morning, the world was nothing but white. A crushed silence stretched over the valley like a burial cloth. Macklin Rowe stood alone at the ridge, breath trailing from his lips in short, slow clouds. His gloved hand resting on the saddle horn of Sable, the old Mustang whose black coat steamed faintly in the morning chill. They'd been walking for nearly 2 hours, following the wreckage of the old cable line that used to run supplies down to the ranger posts before the budget cuts and storms had eaten everything. What was left now were broken pylons, wire half swallowed by frost, and one man with too much time and not enough company. Sable's ears flicked. He snorted once, sharply, and stomped the snow. Mac paused. There, just below the ridge. Not the wind, not an animal. It was a shape. He moved down the slope fast as the ice would let him, boots crunching through the hard crust of snow. As he got closer, the shapes sharpened into limbs. People. 2 women lay half buried, their jackets stiff, cheeks raw, lashes iced over. Blood had crusted on the shoulder of the red-haired one. The other had a smear of black down her jaw, gunpowder smoke still clinging to the air like a bad memory. Mac didn't ask questions, didn't yell for help. He knelt, unfastened his wool scarf, and wrapped it tight around the darker-haired woman's arm to slow the bleeding. She didn't wake. He turned to the other, checked her pulse. Weak, but there. Her ID badge had fallen open. Rhea Collins. The name meant nothing. The badge did. The cold was biting deep by then, creeping past the edges of his coat. But there was something in Mac's hands again, something to do, something clear. He built fire with a wax torch pulled from his pack, an old habit from fireline days. He laid them side by side as close to the flame as he dared, packed snow around their bodies to slow further shock, and leaned in, murmuring nonsense meant to keep them tethered. When it came time to move, he fastened rope under Rhea's shoulders, lashed her to Sable's back as gently as he could. The Mustang didn't flinch. She had carried wounded before. Marisol, the second ranger, wouldn't fit the saddle. Mac stripped 2 spruce limbs clean, lashed them with spare cable, and dragged her across the snow, slow and steady, every muscle in his back burning with each step. They made it to the old shack by Hollow Creek, just as dusk turned the snow into steel. It was a forgotten outpost, built in '78 and abandoned sometime in the '80s when the funding dried up and the rangers left. Mac knew it because he'd helped build the damn place in his 20s. The lock had long since rusted through. The door groaned when he pushed it open, dust blooming in the dark like ghosts of every man who'd once sat inside. He cleared space by the old stove, lit the last of his wax bundles, and kept the flame steady with broken chair legs and books. So old, the ink flaked from the pages. The light flickered against the frost-bitten walls. Rhea stirred first, eyes fluttering like someone climbing out of deep water. He held out his canteen, murmured something low, and she took a sip. She looked like she wanted to ask questions, but her mouth was cracked with cold, and the words didn't come. Marisol lay still, but her chest moved. That was enough. Outside, the storm raged again. The kind of wind that didn't just howl, but circled like it was looking for someone to blame. Mac stood at the lone window, watching the pines bend and sway. The shack was solid, but not built for siege. He checked the door twice, then 3 times, then sat near the stove and waited. It was late when it happened. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows. Mac had dozed off with one hand resting on the axe by the wall, a habit older than memory. Something woke him. Not a sound, not quite, but the absence of silence. The air had shifted. He stood slowly, heart ticking a little faster than the cold should have made it. The steps were soft at first. Crunch, pause. Then again, crunch, crunch. Right outside the front porch. Mac moved to the door, hand on the knob, breath held. He pulled it open fast. There was no one. But there, on the wooden step, steam from a kettle. The old iron kettle. The kind they hadn't used. The one that had been rusted and dry when he first checked the supply rack. Now it sat square on the step, fresh water inside, boiling so hot it fogged his face. He didn't step out. Not yet. His eyes dropped. The snow around the shack was untouched, mostly. Except for one path, one set of prints. They were big. Not boot tracks, not snowshoe marks. Toes, long, wide, deep. And placed with intention. Not like something fleeing, but like something that had come to leave something behind. He stepped back inside and shut the door, slow. Didn't say a word, just stared at the stove for a long time. The girls slept. Rhea curled against the wall like she'd always belonged there. Marisol's hand twitched. Max sat back down, picked up a piece of cedar, fed the fire. In his mind, the prints burned bright. Something had been here, not to hurt, to help. And somewhere deep inside him, past the layers of cynicism and rusted trust, something shifted. Not quite belief, not yet, but a crack. The kettle hissed quietly, steam curling upward. And outside, in the trees, the wind moved differently, like it was breathing, watching. He didn't sleep the rest of that night. And when morning came, and the fire had burned to a quiet amber core, Max stepped outside into the hush. The prints were gone, but the feeling stayed. A presence, not evil, not wild, just waiting, as if the forest had remembered something, or someone, and had chosen, this time, to step in. By morning, the light over Hollow Creek had shifted from storm gray to a brittle blue, filtered through clouds that couldn't quite decide if they were done with winter. The snow had softened, not by warmth, but by fatigue, as if the storm itself had exhaled and laid down to rest. Macklin Rowe stepped out of the shack with a handful of kindling, boots creaking over the frost-slick porch, eyes tracing the tree line where the prints had been. Gone now, no melt, no wind to erase them, just gone. He didn't speak of it to the women. Not yet. Inside, the fire hissed low. Rhea Collins had propped herself up against the far wall, pale but stubbornly alert. Marisol Vega still drifted in and out, lips cracked, a smear of ash darkening her cheek like a bruise. They hadn't spoken much through the night. What could they say? Wounds had a way of silencing people, not just the ones that bled. Sable stood tethered near the side of the shack, pawing the snow with a strange rhythm. 3 quick knocks, then stillness. Mac caught it, filed it away. Not nervousness, not random, like she was waiting for something. Later that morning, while clearing broken boards near the stove, Sable startled again. She reared back slightly, hooves landing hard on the floor. A dull thud echoed through the room, then a second. Mac froze. Beneath the corner panel, one of the old pine boards popped loose. He knelt, ran his hand along the crack, then pried it open with a rusted awl. Beneath it, hidden in the hollow space, lay a cache of old ranger gear, buried like bones. Oil lantern, unused. 2 rolls of bandages, a rust-colored wool blanket, and a journal. Green canvas bound, frayed at the spine. The name on the inside flap, scribbled in faded ink. Cole Avery. Rhea's voice cracked behind him. "He's supposed to be dead." Mac looked up. She sat stiffly, watching the journal like it had teeth. "He went missing in '89. This was his last post." Mac handed her the book. She hesitated, then opened it. Her eyes moved fast, skipping over pages. Then she handed it to Marisol, who had stirred at the scent of coffee he'd burned too long on the stove. Marisol flipped to the last few entries. "He thought someone was tailing him," she said, voice raw. "Someone inside. He started hiding supplies, said he didn't trust Voss anymore." Mac crouched by the open floor again, running his hand across the edges of the cache. No dust. The blanket was still soft. It hadn't been buried for years. Someone had placed it back recently. Outside, the sun broke for a moment, casting thin light over the clearing. Mac stood slowly, then looked at Rhea. "What the hell were you two doing out here anyway?" Rhea looked toward Marisol, then back at Mac. Her jaw clenched. "Following a cartel route. They're using the border trails to move shipments, drugs, cash, sometimes people. Colton Voss tipped them off. He sent us out here with coordinates, said it was a bust spot. It was a setup." Marisol nodded faintly. "I was by the creek when I heard the shot. I saw a figure, something massive. Pick me up. Next thing I knew, I was on the snowbank." Her eyes flitted toward the door, then down to her lap. "I think it saved me." Mac didn't speak. Not for a long time. Then he reached for his coat, pulled on his gloves, and said, "We check the creek, now." It took most of the day. The trail was half hidden, but Mac knew how to follow the land. Snow told stories if you knew how to listen. Near the bend where the ice had thinned, they found it. A torn leather glove, dark brown, military issue. And a revolver. Nickel-plated, .357, still loaded. Mac checked the serial number. This was Cole's. Not far from it, drag marks in the snow. Thin, sharp, not wide enough for a person to have crawled. Something had been pulled, or had limped maybe. The marks bent toward the trees, winding back toward the old C3 mine entrance. They stood there a while, saying nothing. Mac reached into his coat and pulled a crumpled Polaroid. It was old, water-warped, a photo of the fire crew from '83. He stared at it a beat longer, then folded it again and slipped it into his breast pocket. "We go at first light," he said. "Whatever's at that mine, someone didn't want you to find it." The walk back was colder than expected. No wind, just the kind of cold that settled deep behind the ribs. When they reached the shack, dusk had begun to fold across the sky, dragging long shadows across the snow. The wind moved like a whisper, brushing branches like fingers over glass. Inside, Mac stoked the fire again. Rhea folded the blanket they'd pulled from under the floor and set it at Marisol's side. There were no more questions, just the soft sounds of a building creaking in the thaw. Then it happened again. Sable, standing still beneath the awning, tapped her front hoof. 3 times, sharp, deliberate. Mac turned toward the door. No footsteps, no sounds on the porch. He opened it anyway. There, just beyond the tree line, something moved. Not fast, not threatening, just enough. Eyes, not glowing, not wild. Watching, patient. The kind of gaze that didn't ask for anything, just waited to be seen. Mac stepped back inside. Said nothing, but Rhea noticed his expression. She followed his gaze out the window, then looked back at him. She didn't ask, just nodded. She felt it too. The air inside grew still, like the cabin itself was listening. Later that night, while the others slept, Mac sat by the fire and opened Cole Avery's journal again. He flipped past the first entries, weather notes, patrol logs, trail markings, until he found a page marked with a strip of cloth. 3 knocks last night, it read. Not wind, not deer. Intent, felt watched, not afraid. Mac looked up, toward the wall, then out the window, where the snow light filtered dim through frost-streaked glass. He didn't blink. He didn't feel alone anymore. Not in the way that haunted men did, but in the way a man might feel when someone stood watch while he slept. And somewhere between the pop of pine wood in the fire and the faint breath of wind brushing the cabin eaves, something old settled into place. A pattern, a rhythm. 3 knocks, then silence. But not absence, just presence. The wind had gone quiet, but not the forest. Every sound carried differently now. The soft drip of melting frost, the groan of frozen timber loosening under morning light. It was the kind of silence that didn't comfort, but warned. The kind that told you something unseen was listening too. The 3 of them, Macklin Rowe, Rhea Collins, and Marisol Vega, moved through the thinning snow toward the C3 mine as if they were stepping through the breath of something sleeping. The trees stood close and tall, their trunks scorched black at the roots from an old burn. Mac knew this place. Every scar in the bark, every slope of earth. Fire left its handwriting everywhere. He'd helped contain one here 10 years ago. The trail wound narrow between pines. Rhea limped slightly, the wound on her side stitched up with Mac's rough field kit. Marisol walked behind, her recorder clutched tight in her gloved hands like a talisman. She'd said little since dawn, only pressed the red button every now and then to capture their progress, as if naming what they saw would somehow make it less dangerous. When they reached the old ridge overlooking the mine, the snow had thinned to ice. The C3 pit gaped wide below them, a scar of gray earth and collapsed metal. The main shaft's entrance had caved in years ago, but smaller tunnels snaked out like veins across the hillside. Mac crouched low behind a broken truck carcass. His breath fogged the air in thin ribbons. They moved down cautiously, the smell of rust and oil still thick despite the cold. Rhea spotted the first sign, tire tracks fresh. Not snowed over. 2 sets, a truck and something lighter, maybe an ATV. She knelt, running her hand along the edge of the print. They've been here within 24 hours. Mac scanned the area. There were wooden crates near the entrance, stacked under a blue tarp that had stiffened into ice sheets. He pulled it back, slow, inside. Plastic-wrapped bundles stamped in red ink. The smell hit them even through the plastic. Diesel, chemicals, sweet rot. Cocaine, Marisol murmured, half to herself, into the recorder. Her voice shook, breath fogging the microphone. Field cache confirmed. Quantity unknown. Location C3 pit. Marked for delivery. December 16th, 1200. The words froze in the air between them. Mac reached in and lifted a small ledger wedged under one of the bundles. The paper was dry, surprisingly intact. Scrawled handwriting in thick pencil filled the columns. Dates, initials, times, short phrases that didn't need full words. And there it was again. Deck 16, 1200. He shut the book, slipped it inside his coat. We have to move, now! They didn't get far. Marisol had turned toward the northern ridge when something metallic glinted in her periphery. A reflection off glass. She dropped low without thinking. Mac followed the motion, squinting through the glare. There, on the upper slope, angled perfectly toward them, was a sniper's perch. Metal case, long barrel, the faint shimmer of breath rising above it. Someone's still here, Rhea whispered. They slid behind an old mining cart, breath tight, hearts in sync with the slow pulse of fear. Mac gestured toward the left side of the slope, where an access path dipped around the mound. We fall back to the west side, use the equipment stacks for cover. The crunch of their boots in the half-melted snow sounded deafening. The wind picked up again, whistling through rusted beams. As they reached the slope, Rhea froze. A sound, barely there, echoed from behind the rock wall. It was like stone shifting under strain, but steady, intentional. Then the ground trembled. A slab near the entrance slid sideways with a grinding groan, revealing a dark gap, small, maybe 3 feet high, leading down. Mac's breath hitched. That wasn't wind. The air inside the opening smelled like dirt and wet iron, older than the mine itself. The timing was too clean. Something or someone had moved it. Then came the shot. The first bullet struck the rim of the old truck bed, flinging shards of metal into the air. The second cracked through the snow just inches from Marisol's boots. Mac shoved her down and yelled without words, motioning toward the hole. They dove inside, one after another, just as another shot split the air. The echo rolled through the pit like thunder. Inside, the dark swallowed them whole. Their breaths came ragged, bouncing off stone. The tunnel sloped downward, slick with condensation. Mac flicked on his headlamp, the narrow beam cutting a path through dust. The air was colder here, untouched. It smelled of age. Rhea pressed her back to the wall, clutching her side. "We can't stay in one place. That shooter'll come looking." Mac nodded. "Keep moving. Stay low." They followed the tunnel's curve until it widened into an old chamber where miners once stored blasting caps and rope. The remnants of wooden shelves clung to the walls like skeletons. Mac raised his light higher and froze. On the stone, just above eye level, a print, burned into the rock, faint but visible. It looked like soot or ash pressed deep by heat. The outline was a hand, huge. Each finger stretched longer than a man's palm. But what froze him was the detail, the ridges, whorls, lines like a human fingerprint. He reached out but didn't touch. His voice came quiet. "This isn't from a tool." Rhea looked at him, eyes dark and wide. "What could leave that?" Marisol whispered, "Maybe. Whatever moved that stone." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick, alive, as if the walls themselves remembered something. A faint warmth lingered in the air. Not from the lamps, not from them. It was residual, like the echo of heat after fire. Mac's pulse slowed, a deep memory stirring, smoke, the roar of a forest fire, the flash of a massive shape moving through the haze 10 years ago. A hand reaching, pulling him from the blaze when the others had already fallen. He swallowed hard and turned away. "We keep going." They moved deeper until the tunnel branched. One path collapsed under rockfall. The other led toward a thin shaft of daylight filtering through cracks in the hillside. Mac crouched, checked the airflow. "That's our way out." Rhea started first, climbing through, boots scraping the rock. Marisol followed, still clutching the recorder. She paused once, turned back to look at the burned handprint. Her breath shuddered. Then she climbed. By the time Mac emerged, dusk was already pressing down over the valley. The mine entrance behind them looked smaller, swallowed by shadow. No sign of pursuit. Only the quiet rush of the creek below. They walked until they reached the clearing near the frozen stream. The sun had dropped, light bending low through the pines. Mac knelt beside the water, washed the grit from his hands, and stared at his reflection. His face looked older here. Tired, lined not by years, but by what he'd seen. Behind him, Rhea and Marisol stood side by side, the recorder still running. Marisol's voice, steadier now, carried over the faint hum of wind. Date, December 12, 1993. Evidence recovered from C3 mine. Ledger marked for December 16th. Subject presence unknown. Possible human activity, possible. She stopped. Looked at Mac. "Do I call it?" He didn't answer. The forest did. A branch cracked in the distance. Not near, but close enough to echo. Then another, deeper, more deliberate. Mac rose, eyes scanning the tree line. The movement came from behind a stand of furs. Massive, slow, like the shifting of muscle under shadow. For a second, the outline of a shoulder, the edge of a head. Too high for any man. Then gone. Rhea gripped her rifle, hand trembling. "It's watching us." Mac shook his head. "No, if it wanted us gone, we'd be gone." The words sounded strange even to him, but he believed them. They stood there until the light thinned into twilight, until the forest settled again into the rhythm of its own breathing. Then they turned back toward Hollow Creek, the recorder still humming faintly. As they reached the ridge, Marisol whispered, almost to herself, "It's not hunting us." Rhea glanced back. "Then what the hell is it doing?" Marisol's eyes were on the trees, where the fading light caught the faint shimmer of mist rising between trunks. Watching, protecting maybe. I don't know. Mac didn't look back. But he heard it, the faint echo of something heavy moving through the snow, distant but measured. Not following, just there. When they reached the shack again, the fire still burned from the logs Mac had banked that morning. Warmth filled the room, soft and human. But outside, the forest remained awake, its heart still beating slow and patient. Mac sat by the window long after the women had fallen asleep. His eyes found the tree line once more. There was nothing visible now, only the faint glow of snow under the moon. But deep inside, he knew. Whatever had saved them back at the mine had done so with intent. And as he stared at his own reflection in the window pane, tired, scarred, but alive, he realized the truth that frightened him more than the storm or the bullets ever could. It wasn't a beast he was dealing with. It was something that remembered him. And that night, while the forest breathed around the cabin, the echo of that burned handprint refused to fade. The storm came back like a curse that remembered their names. Not like the first time, when it had howled through the valley with cold teeth and distance, but low and crawling, with a silence at the edge of its wind that made even Sable's breathing hitch. The fire in the shack popped quietly as night thickened outside. Mac sat near the stove, his old boots steaming from half-thawed snow, one hand gripping the old photograph they'd pulled from the mine chamber. The corner was charred, edges flaked like dead bark, but the image was still there. 5 men in ash-smeared gear standing in front of a wrecked fire line, helmets tilted back, faces half lost in soot. And there, just behind Mac's younger self, in the background shadow, a shape. No face, no motion, just a presence, a 6th figure where none should have been. Marisol studied the photo from across the room without a word. Rhea leaned back against the wall, rewrapping the gauze at her ribs, every motion stiff and careful. No one wanted to say what they were all thinking, that whatever had left that handprint in the stone, whatever had pulled Marisol out of the river, and whatever had boiled water on the step without a sound, wasn't done yet. Then came the snap. Not from inside, from outside. It wasn't wind. It wasn't ice cracking off the roof. It was a deliberate step in snow. Then another. A silence. Then voices. Not yelling, not panicked. Calm. Cold. The kind of calm that only comes from men with power and no fear of consequence. Mac moved to the window, lifted one corner of the curtain just enough to see. There were 3 of them, dressed in black and snow-dusted tan, rifles slung low, moving like they'd done this before. Their faces were hidden under scarves. One of them was laughing into a radio. Rhea grabbed her sidearm. "It's Voss's men." Marisol didn't speak. She was already moving toward the gear, jamming fresh cassette tape into the recorder, hands shaking hard enough to make the buttons click twice. Mac turned to Sable, who stood by the far wall, her ears twitching, one hoof lifting and tapping the floor in short bursts. 3 times. Then still. Outside, the first spark lit up the edge of the window. Gasoline. A dull roar followed. The smell of burning snow was sharp, chemical, unmistakable. Flames caught the edge of the door frame, began crawling up the wood like it knew where to go. They had seconds. Mac's mind reached back, clawed through memory like smoke. He looked down at the floor, the softest part of the shack. Sable had stomped there twice. He dropped to his knees, grabbed the leg of the old stove, and yanked hard. The board cracked. Beneath it, not the same cache from earlier, but something deeper. A hollow wide enough for a man to crawl through. He grabbed the crowbar, slammed it against the floorboards once, twice, until they split away like bark. Underneath, blackness. A shaft. The old mine line. The emergency tunnel that hadn't been mapped in years. "Down!" he barked. "Now!" Marisol went first, lowering the recorder in a canvas pouch strapped tight to her chest. Rhea followed, coughing from smoke already clawing at her lungs. Mac turned once more toward the door. The flames now licked up the outer wall. Then, the thud, a sound from outside. Not boots, not guns. Stone. Heavy. Sliding. He glanced back toward the hatch. Someone, was pushing the loose slab of old rock above the crawl space behind them. No face, no words, just the sound of movement. Controlled, protective. He dropped down last, just as the shaft sealed behind him with a low, muffled boom. Darkness swallowed them whole. Mac clicked on the old lantern they'd found beneath the boards, the one that had survived since '78. It flickered to life, casting a dim amber light against the stone walls, slick with condensation. The air smelled of wet ash and time. The tunnel was narrow, sloping gently downward, lined with warped timber supports. Their breaths were loud in the tight space, every footstep echoing down toward silence. Mac led the way, one hand brushing the wall as they moved, half-trusting muscle memory from a decade ago. They moved for what felt like an hour, time bending strange underground. Then, the tunnel split. One path collapsed in on itself. The other veered left, then up, toward a grate half-covered in moss and rot. Marisol pushed ahead and climbed, kicking the grate loose with a soft grunt. The night air hit them like a slap. Cold, metallic, burned. They were out, on the far ridge now, northeast of Hollow Creek. The cabin burned behind them. From here, the flames looked almost peaceful. A glow among trees. A memory dying. No gunshots, no yelling. Just the sound of fire, and the distant hush of forest watching it all. They stood in silence until the roof caved in with a groan, sparks shooting up toward the clouds. Then Mac noticed something wedged between the roots of an old spruce nearby, almost hidden by moss. A scrap of old photograph. He reached down, peeled it free with cold fingers. Another shot from that fire crew photo. But this one burned different. The background was darker, less shadow, more shape. And behind him, behind the same line of firefighters, was the clear outline of a figure that didn't belong. A broad shoulder, hair matted down with soot, no helmet. One hand rested on Mac's shoulder in the photo. Massive. Wrong. Marisol leaned over, her breath caught. "I don't remember a sixth guy," Mac said, voice low. "You would," Rhea said softly. "You were always the last one out of the fire line. You'd remember." But he didn't. Or maybe he did and had spent years forgetting. The photo shook slightly in his hand. Not from fear, from recognition. He folded it without a word, slipped it inside his coat next to Cole Avery's journal. They moved on, deeper into the forest, walking until the burning cabin was no longer visible, just a faint orange stain in the snow-slick night. Behind them, no footsteps, but the sense remained that something had closed that shaft, had covered their escape, had waited all these years, and had once saved a man who didn't want to be saved. As they crossed the ridgeline, the moon broke through the cloud cover just enough to catch the frost on Sable's mane. The Mustang turned her head sharply, looking off into the trees. 3 short taps of her hoof, and the distant sound of snow shifting. Not wind. Wait. The past had circled back around, and this time it wasn't asking. It was waiting to be named, and the forest held its breath. The storm broke sometime before dawn, but the wind stayed behind like a ghost unwilling to let go. Cold light bled slowly across the snow-covered ridges of Elk Hollow as Mac led the others up the final rise, Sable steady beneath him, each hoofprint darkening the slush like ink on paper. Marisol walked behind, one hand on the side of her jacket where the micro-cassette recorder pulsed faintly against her ribs, as if it too had a heartbeat. Rhea moved slower now, face tight with pain, but she kept pace. No one said much. Words hadn't helped in days. The ranger station loomed ahead. Concrete, metal roof dulled with rust. Snow curled around the base like a slow tide. It had been shuttered years ago, but someone had opened it recently. Mac saw the prints before the door even came into view. Not boots, lug soles, regulation tread, military style. Fresh. They stepped inside. The warmth hit first. Not from fire, but from power. Heat humming through ancient vents, fluorescent lights blinking overhead, too bright after days of firelight and dusk. A woman stood near the back table, tall, lean, jacket zipped to her throat, silver in her hair that didn't look like age so much as frost that never melted. Her badge read, Ada Whitcomb, Federal Wildlife Service. But her eyes said something else, like she'd already read the story they hadn't told yet. "You Macklin Rowe?" she asked, without moving. He nodded. She didn't offer a hand. "I've been waiting 3 years to meet the man with the Mustang." Mac said nothing. He just turned slightly. Let Sable walk a few slow steps further into the station. Her black coat shimmered in the artificial light, streaked with ash and frost. Her mane had thinned from old scars, but her eyes were sharp, unbroken. Ada moved around the table slowly. She pulled a file from a box marked 1988 and slapped it down hard enough to startle the silence. Inside, photos, burnt forest, collapsed structure, charred bodies, and one grainy image taken on Kodak film, blown up too far and blurred, but still clear enough to make out the frame of a horse standing in the smoke. Small black X's circled the figure. Words scrawled beside it. Missing, assumed dead. "I was there when we pulled bodies out of Canyon Ridge. Your name showed up twice, once on the missing list, once on the survivor list. But that horse, we never found it." Mac looked down at Sable. Her ears flicked, slow, lazy. He stepped back. "I did," he said quietly. 2 weeks after the fire, she walked into camp like nothing touched her. Ada stared at him a long time. "Some things just don't die the way they're supposed to," she said. Then she turned to the table and motioned for the others to sit. Rhea laid out the photographs from the C3 site. Images from the Polaroid Mac had snapped near the crates. Marisol handed over the microcassette, already labeled, time-stamped. She didn't speak as she set it down. Her hand brushed against the film canister she kept tucked into her coat. She placed it next to the others. Ada reached for it all, scanned each piece, eyes tracking fast. Then she froze. Her fingers held the edge of one photograph, the Fireline crew from '83, the same one Mac had pulled from the collapsed photo cache. She slid a magnifier across it. Her breath caught. "This hand," she whispered. "This isn't yours." Mac didn't answer. "It's not in the personnel record. There were 5 men in that photo, not 6. And this one," she said, tapping the burned corner. "This hand, it's too big. It's not glove bulk, it's bone." She didn't finish the sentence. Just looked up at Mac like she was waiting for permission to believe. He didn't give it. She took a long breath, rubbed her temples like the truth was pushing too hard against the inside of her skull. Voss shows up at C3 with a shipment scheduled for the 16th. That's 2 days from now. Noon, sharp. If we can get eyes on the drop, catch his men in the act, catch him on tape, we can bury him. Not just transfer or reprimand, bury. Rhea leaned forward, wincing. "We'll need to draw him out. Give him something he thinks is unfinished." Ada nodded. "You're the bait. He thinks you're dead. Let's use that." Outside, the wind rose again. Sable lifted her head and stared toward the tree line. Mac followed her gaze, but saw nothing. Still, the forest felt full. like breath held too long. They spent the next hour going over maps, marking trail points, cover angles, time windows. Ada kept running the cassette, slow, then fast, then slow again, studying Voss's voice for hesitation, but his words were steady. Kill them all. No bodies. Just burn it. Mac stepped away and walked toward the far end of the station, where the bulletin board from the 80s still hung yellowed and warped. Old missing posters, elk counts, a faded photograph of a ranger team from years past. He reached out and brushed the edge of one pinned article. Then he paused. There, at the corner of the board, barely visible, was a torn edge of paper curling forward like a fingertip. He pulled it loose. A newspaper clipping. Fireline tragedy. Lists of dead and survivors. He scanned the names. His was there. At the bottom, next to it, handwritten in red ink. If he walked out, someone walked him. Mac folded the paper, slipped it into his pocket without a word. When he turned back, Ada was staring at him again. "You sure you were alone in that fire?" she asked. Not like it was accusation, but like it was the last thing keeping her from unraveling something too big to hold. Mac looked at the window. "I was sure," he said. He didn't sound sure anymore. Later, when the light outside had shifted toward evening and the snow began to fall again in soft, tired flakes, Ada stepped out to radio in the plan. Rhea lay stretched on a cot, boots off, eyes open. Marisol paced slowly, back and forth near the rack of old gear, as if walking could burn off the weight gathering in her chest. Mac moved to Sable, ran his hand gently down her side, feeling the warmth of her under his palm. She turned her head and looked at him, one eye dark and still. She hadn't made a sound since they'd arrived. "I shouldn't have brought you back here," he whispered. But she didn't flinch. Some things just didn't die, not because they were too strong, because they were still needed. When Ada came back inside, her face had changed. Less agent, more believer. She opened a folder, pulled out one final photo. Not from a fire line, from a wildlife camera, deep in the Bitterroots. Date stamp, June 1991. In the frame, a clearing. A large shadow, tall, bipedal, half turned toward the lens. Fur matted with mud. A hand curled around the trunk of a cedar. Human-shaped, but wrong in the angles, wrong in the weight. Ada tapped the image. "You think this is what saved you?" Mac didn't answer. He just reached into his coat and pulled out the scorched photograph, laid it beside the new one. And in both, right hand, same length, same bend, same scar above the thumb. Rhea rose slowly and crossed to the table, her voice low. "This isn't myth, it's memory." Ada nodded, like she'd known all along but finally had permission to say it. Outside, Sable stepped twice, then tapped her hoof 3 times. And from deep in the timber, something shifted. Not a threat. A watcher, waiting, and the wind. No longer alone. The cold that morning didn't feel like winter. It felt like steel. Sharp and hard-edged, with no breath behind it. Just the stillness of something waiting to happen. The kind of quiet that settles over a place just before something breaks. The sun hung low above the ridgeline, pale and distant, casting no warmth. Only the illusion of it. Noon was an hour away. Site C3 sat in the bowl of the valley like a wound that hadn't scabbed over. Ada Whitcomb crouched low behind the outcropping near the western rise, binoculars pressed to her face, scanning the dirt access road leading in. Her voice came through the analog radio clipped to Mac's belt. No interference, no chatter. Just 5 words. "Target inbound, 2 minutes out." Mac shifted his stance, the gravel crunching beneath his boots. He stood by a rusted winch pole near the northern wall of the quarry. Rhea was 20 yards east behind a loader rig, rifle slung, bandage tight across her ribs. Marisol stayed high on the south ridge with the microcassette recorder primed and running. Lens pointed down toward the clearing. She had a camera too, a battered Nikon from the station archive. already loaded with black and white. She hadn't spoken since dawn. Sable stood at Mac's side, reins draped but untouched, her eyes fixed on the tree line. She didn't blink much anymore. She just listened. Her hooves shifted once, twice, then stilled. The truck came slow around the bend. Matte green, windowless, tires thick with dried clay from a road further south. It stopped at the center of the pit. The engine died. The door opened. Colton Voss stepped out first, alone. No vest, no gloves. Just a parka zipped halfway, a ball cap low over his eyes, and a hand resting on the pistol clipped to his belt like it had always been there. Mac didn't move. Behind Voss, a second man climbed out. Tall, gaunt, eyes like sandpaper. He carried nothing visible, but Mac knew the type. The kind that moved quick only when it was too late. The third man didn't step out. He stayed perched high on the ridge. A glint of sunlight off his scope betrayed him for just a second before he went still again. Ada saw it too. Sniper confirmed. Upper east, wind steady. 60 yards. Mac's fingers tensed at his side. Then the ground shook. Not a quake. A fall. Something massive hitting rock from above. A boulder, not small, not accidental, slammed down from the north ridge like it had been dropped by the hand of God. It crushed the sniper's perch, sent the gun spinning midair before vanishing into the snow below. Everyone froze. The shooter didn't scream. He was just gone. Voss spun, reaching for his pistol. Ada's voice barked through the radio. "Move now!" Mac didn't wait. He stepped out into the open. Sable followed like she already knew. Rhea came down from the loader's shadow, rifle raised. Ada appeared from the ridge above, sidearm drawn. Voss hesitated. His face cracked wide with disbelief. "You were supposed to be dead," he muttered. Marisol's voice carried from above, sharp and cold through the megaphone mic. December 16th, noon, C3 drop, target in visual, audio rolling. The second man ran for the truck. Sable moved first, lunging forward in a blur, her hooves striking the ground hard enough to shake the frame. She slammed her shoulder into the front wheel well, sent the truck spinning halfway before its rear axle snapped on the exposed rock. The back hatch burst open, crates tumbled out. White powder spilled across the gravel like frost. Voss fired once. The shot rang through the quarry. Mac felt the heat of it skim past his jaw. Then something moved between him and the shooter. A shadow, tall, wide. And then the sound, low and guttural. Not animal, not human. Like stone grinding under breath. Voss stumbled backward as the figure stepped into full view. 8 feet tall, coated in dark fur streaked with ash and light. Chest heaving, eyes burning gold. One arm raised, a ragged scar across the forearm. Mac didn't move. He didn't have to. The figure stood between him and death, silent and unmoving. Voss fired again. The bullet struck the creature's shoulder, sent a spray of blood across the rocks. But the figure didn't fall. It growled, deep and low. The kind of sound that makes men remember things they tried to forget. The second man raised a blade. He didn't even reach the tree line before the creature took one step, then another, and leapt. No one followed. Mac walked slowly toward Voss, who now trembled, gun dropped, knees sinking into the dirt like he'd suddenly remembered what guilt felt like. Ada reached him first, zip ties in hand, breath hard. "You're under federal arrest," she said. "For conspiracy, attempted murder, drug trafficking." Voss screamed. "You don't understand," he barked, throat raw. "You're just scratching the floor. You don't see what's above. You're playing with dirt while the sky watches." Ada glanced at Mac. He stared past them. The creature was gone. No sound, no blood trail, only a mark on the concrete where the impact had been, one handprint. Massive, smudged with crimson and dust. Marisol snapped the photo. No one told her to. Rhea exhaled a long, tired breath and sat down on a crate like her ribs had finally given out. The wind passed through the quarry once more, slower this time. Not cold, just quiet. Ada looked down at Voss, whose hands now shook uncontrollably. "You ever touch that dirt again?" she said. and you'll find out who's been watching it long before we did." He didn't respond. He just kept repeating the same line. "You touched the lowest hand. You touched the lowest hand." Then he laughed. But it was a laugh that didn't belong in a man's mouth. Mac walked away, toward the northern wall. Sable followed behind him, calm again. Her hooves left no prints in the new snow. The sun crested high over the trees. No one spoke for a long time. And above them, near the shattered sniper perch, a raven circled once, then vanished into the glare. What remained on the ground wasn't just busted crates and spent shells. It was proof of something older, something that didn't need to be seen to be remembered. The air held it, the rocks held it, and every man and woman who walked out of that quarry knew one thing. Whatever lived beyond the tree line had just made its choice, and it had chosen to protect, but not forever, just this once, because something had remembered them first, and now they had seen its face. By the time the snow melted down into slush and runoff, Livingston was a town full of tired breath and sore eyes. Winter hadn't left, not really. It had just stepped back for a minute, let the skies gray over with a softness that made folks believe spring might actually show up this year. The courthouse stood still at the end of Main, like it always had. Brick and pale stone, windows that never blinked, and an American flag hanging limp in windless air. Nobody was cheering when the vans pulled up. Nobody waved. The only sound was the shuffle of shoes on wet pavement, the low mumble of boots climbing steps, and the flat click of cameras already aimed at the door. Inside, it was warm in a way that didn't feel kind. Heat from forced air buzzing above the ceiling panels, fluorescent lights that made skin look washed and hollow. Ada Whitcomb sat in the front row beside Marisol and Rhea, each of them with their backs straight, faces unreadable. The federal prosecutor stood stiff in her suit, files stacked like bricks at her side. Colton Voss was led in under guard, wrists cuffed, jaw tight, eyes forward. He didn't flinch when the cameras snapped. He didn't blink when the charges were read. Drug trafficking, conspiracy, multiple counts of attempted homicide, federal obstruction. But he looked once, across the courtroom, toward Macklin Row. And that's when something passed between them. Not rage, not regret. Just recognition. The kind you can't scrub from a man's bones. Mac didn't return the look. He sat still, hands folded in his lap, one knee bouncing in a rhythm too faint to hear. He hadn't said much since the drop at Site C3. He'd spoken only when he had to, into the recorder for the written affidavit. No dramatics, just facts. What he saw, what he remembered, what was left behind in blood and handprints and a silence deeper than sound. But that day, they wanted his voice. Not just the paperwork. The court needed testimony, the kind that couldn't be filed away. So when his name was called and he stepped up, there was no defense attorney smile, no smirking cross-exam. Just a microphone, a wooden chair, and a room so still it felt like it was waiting to breathe. He sat down slowly, adjusted the mic, looked out across the benches, not at Voss, not at the prosecutor, not at Ada or the reporters or the court clerk's stiff face. His eyes landed somewhere else, past all of it, past the glass. "I was a firefighter," he began, voice rough but steady. "Started young, stayed in longer than I should have. I've walked into more burning timber than I care to count. Lost friends, saved others. That's just the job." He paused. In 1983, we were sent into the Hollow Creek burn. It wasn't supposed to go bad. Forecasts said low winds, decent containment. But we were wrong. Fire rolled over the ridge faster than we thought. Cut off the main team. 5 of us were left inside. We tried to make it out. The courtroom didn't move. Even the judge leaned forward a little. "I got separated. Last I remember, I was coughing up black, gear melting, heat blistering through my gloves. Then I woke up, outside, covered in ash, throat burned raw, but alive. I couldn't explain it. They found me near the creek edge. No sign of how I got there." He looked down for a moment, then back up. They told me it was adrenaline, some survival burst, that maybe I crawled, but I didn't. I know what it feels like to be carried. I know what a hand gripping your shoulder feels like. He opened his jacket slowly, reached into the inside pocket, and pulled out the photo. The one scorched along the corner, edges curled like leaves after a flame. This was our crew. Shot 2 days before the burn. That's me, second from the right. That's Jim Mathers next to me. He died in that fire. There were 5 of us, but count the figures. He held the photo up toward the judge. The clerk came forward, took it gently, passed it along. 6, Mac said. There's 6. A long silence settled over the room like a shroud. Then the prosecutor nodded once. And do you know who that 6th figure is, Mr. Rowe? No, Mac answered. But I know what it did. He turned toward the gallery then, toward the reporters, toward the rows of people who hadn't lived it, but had seen the photos, had heard the whispers about the handprint at the mine, the blood that wasn't quite human. The stone moved without tools, the way the wind shifted before the shot. I shot at it once, he said softly. In that fire, reflex, I guess, fear. It didn't shoot back, didn't strike. It pulled me out anyway. I still don't know why. Ada lowered her eyes. Rhea stared straight ahead. Marisol reached into her coat and clutched the recorder without pressing play. Mac went quiet, and no one asked for more. Later, when court adjourned and the judge ordered Voss transferred to a federal prison out of state, the press gathered at the steps. Questions flew, cameras rolled, but Mac didn't stop to speak. He stepped out quietly, coat collar turned up against the damp wind. Ada caught up with him halfway to the lot. You did good in there, she said. He didn't answer. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out another envelope. They're calling the evidence list closed. We submitted your photo, Marisol's film, the cassette, the ledger from the mine. Everything. He stopped walking. And the handprint? He asked. She hesitated. They're labeling it inconclusive. He nodded slowly. Of course they are. They stood there for a moment, just listening to the street noise. The far-off engine brake of a logging truck, a crow calling once from the roofline. Then Ada turned her head slightly, as if caught by some thought she hadn't meant to say. You ever think maybe that thing wasn't just watching you? Mac glanced over. What do you mean? Maybe it wasn't there to save you from the fire. Maybe it was following the fire, like it knew something worse was inside it. He didn't answer. She didn't expect him to. As the sun began to slip behind the courthouse roof, they both looked up. And in the far ridgeline beyond the train tracks, just past the last slope of the low pines, something moved. A shape. Upright. Still. No camera caught it. No glass reflected it. But it was there. A silhouette against the fading silver of the sky. Watching. Always watching. Mac lifted his hand once. Not quite a wave. More like a memory acknowledging its source. Then he turned and walked toward his truck. No one stopped him. And the courthouse lights flickered on behind him, one by one, like tired eyes bracing for another night that wouldn't sleep. Before the door shut, Ada whispered under her breath, barely louder than the breeze. If there's something sacred out here, it don't need worship, just respect. And far beyond the town's edge, where the frost had begun to gather again, the forest breathed slow and steady, holding the weight of everything it had seen. Summer returned to Cook City slow and shy, the way it always did after a hard winter, like the ground itself was testing the warmth before letting anything bloom. The snow didn't melt all at once. It pulled back in streaks and patches, revealing frost-killed grass and gravel roads still half swallowed by runoff. But by June, the riverbanks were soft again. Trout pools flickered with sunlight, and the trees had started whispering the old sounds. People noticed, even the ones who never talked about what happened. In the middle of town, just off the square near the ranger station, a new monument had gone up. A bronze statue, not too big, but solid. The image of a wild Mustang standing firm, mane caught in an invisible wind, one hoof raised as if listening. Beneath it, a plaque read, In memory of all who guard the wilderness. Sable, 1981 to unknown. Never broke. Never left. There wasn't a crowd for the unveiling. Just a few dozen people, mostly locals. Rangers in plain clothes. 2 fire line crews from as far as Bitterroot and Gallatin. A class of middle school kids who didn't know who Sable was but understood the way the adults stood still when the cover was pulled. Macklin Rowe didn't speak at the ceremony. He was there, though, standing at the edge of the trees, hands in his pockets, head slightly bowed. No cameras caught him. He wasn't the kind of man who needed to be seen to be felt. Ada Whitcomb stood near the statue with a folder in her arms, papers fluttering softly in the breeze. She looked older, but not tired, just like someone who'd finally stopped pretending she didn't believe in something. When a boy stepped forward and asked who Sable belonged to, she answered, "No one. That's the point." That same day, Ada filed the official creation of a new volunteer group with the state registry. No funding, no weapons, no agencies attached. Just boots, maps, radios, and the will to walk lines where no one else would. She called it the Sable Watch. Volunteers trained to monitor remote forest sectors. Not for patrol, not for enforcement. Just presence, observation, respect. The first code in the manual read, "The woods are not empty. Walk like you're being listened to." They didn't carry drones or wear body cams. Most carried analog radios, old field compasses, waxed canvas maps. One guy brought a hand-cranked tape recorder. They weren't interested in proof. They were interested in memory, in trust, in holding ground that might one day disappear. Mac never officially joined, but he walked with them sometimes. Never said when or why. Just showed up near dusk, rode in quiet beside them on trails no GPS knew existed, and left without a word when they broke camp. The younger volunteers called him the Ghost Ranger. None of them had the nerve to ask about the thing in the photo Ada kept locked in her private files, the one with the handprint on the mine floor. One night, as the sun dipped low over Hollow Creek and the ridge lit up in gold, Mac returned. Not to the courthouse, not to the town, but to the tree line. The old shack was gone now, just black stone and buried nails, moss growing between what used to be walls. Sable stood beside him, same as always, unbridled, untethered. She didn't age like a normal horse, at least not in any way you could measure. He stepped across the remains of the old floorboards, soft pine needles layering everything in silence. It was cooler here, shaded, a pocket of time still holding its breath. And then he saw it. On the flat rock near where he'd found the charred photo. Something new. A tube. Leather. Weathered but intact. Tied shut with cedar bark cord. He didn't reach for it. Just looked. It hadn't been there the last time. Wasn't covered in dust. Placed, not dropped. Inside might have been anything. A map, a drawing. Maybe nothing at all. He didn't need to know. Some messages weren't meant to be read. He left it there, turned his back to it gently, like one does when leaving a grave, and walked down through the underbrush without speaking, not even to Sable. She followed him without sound, her hooves sinking soft into the loam. Back in town, an old woman named Eula Markham sat on the bench near the general store. She wore a red bandana, a denim jacket, and a pair of hiking boots scuffed to hell. When the younger watch volunteers asked her what brought her here, she smiled slow and said, "I got saved once. Thought it was the Lord. Now I think it might have been someone lonelier." She said it happened in 1971. She'd wandered off trail, 6 nights missing. No water on the last 2. On the 7th morning, she woke up laid across moss, jacket pulled over her like a blanket, and a handprint left in the mud beside her. She was 16, told nobody for 40 years. Now she wore it like a story that could finally breathe. Not everyone believed her. Didn't matter. The woods knew, and that was enough. Later that summer, Marisol came back through town. She'd been working on a private documentary. Nothing loud, No voiceover narration. Just footage of trees, wind, fire scars, and long silences. She stopped by the statue before leaving, ran her fingers over the edge of the plaque. Then she drove out to the hollow, alone. She never filmed there. She just stood and listened. That night, the trees moved different, and someone in camp swore they heard 3 soft taps. Not from boots, not from a branch, from the ground. Even now, years later, hikers pass through that stretch of wilderness near the old C3 pit and feel it. Not fear, not awe, something gentler. The kind of quiet that wraps around you like it knows your name. The kind of hush that's alive. There are people who say the forest holds memory. There are others who say it holds judgment. And some, only a few, say it holds watch. One day a letter showed up at the ranger station. No return address. Just a torn photo inside. A young firefighter, soot on his face, half smiling in the ash light. Behind him, a figure. Not seen, but felt. A shadow with shape. A presence with weight. Not proof. Not fiction. Just something that didn't leave. And never would. Because not everything sacred needs to be worshipped. Some things just need to be known. And in that forest, under cedar canopy and snow-bent pine, something still walks. Not behind, not above, beside, watching, waiting, and remembering. Sometimes, the quietest stories are the ones that stay with us the longest. Not because they shout, not because they shock, but because they whisper something true. Something we already knew deep down, even if we couldn't name it. That in the still places of the world, where the wind moves slow and the trees grow tall, there are forces older than we can measure. Not monsters, not myths, but keepers, witnesses, quiet guardians of everything we forget when we go too fast, take too much, or stop listening. This story wasn't about fear. Not really. It was about remembrance. About what it means to carry weight that isn't yours and still choose to protect. About how not all rescues come with sirens. Some come in silence, in steady footsteps, in unseen hands that leave no trace but change everything. And maybe that's the most sacred kind of help. The kind that doesn't need thanks, only understanding. There's something humbling in realizing we are not and have never been alone. Not in our worst hour, not in our quietest grief. There are things that move through this world, not above us, not beneath us, but beside us, with eyes that see deeper than judgment and hearts that remember what we try to forget. That mercy doesn't always look like a miracle. Sometimes it looks like a shadow that doesn't walk away, and maybe the point was never to prove anything. Maybe the point was to feel something. To remember that being watched over doesn't mean being controlled. It means being known. And being known, truly seen and not turned away, is maybe the rarest form of love we get in this life. Not flashy, not loud, but constant, loyal, present, even when we don't deserve it. So take this story, however it lands with you. Let it sit where it needs to. Maybe it reminds you of someone. Maybe it brings back a moment you can't explain. Or maybe, just maybe, it plants the smallest seed of belief. Not in fairy tales, but in the quiet, human truth that sometimes the world is kinder than we think. That, even out in the wild, where no one's watching, something still watches. Thank you for walking through this story with us. If it meant something to you, let us know down in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts, your memories, or your questions. And if you haven't yet, feel free to subscribe and follow along. There are more stories waiting, more voices to hear, more shadows that still walk beside us. Until next time, take care of each other and listen for the silence.